I've been here on this planet for a long time, you know? I've encountered barbers, billionaires, preachers, and presidents who believe they know more than the three of them put together. However, life has a way of making you humble every now and then. The realization that I didn't truly know who Prophet Muhammad was finally dawned on me. Hold on now. Do not misunderstand me. The name was familiar to me. Everyone does. You hear about it in schools, in discussions, and in the news. I haven't studied the man, though. The headlines and the tiny one-liners people like to use are the only things I ever look past. You are aware of human nature. They don't give you the truth. Instead, they give you opinions, sound bites, and bits of information. I'm sitting up late one night, like I usually do when I'm feeling agitated. All right, Steve, I think you've been discussing Islam for a long time, but you don't actually know the man who initiated it. Who is he in reality? I therefore read one biography, then another, attended several lectures, and heard some brothers discuss the life of the Prophet. Why discovered hit me like a ton of bricks, guy? Because I have something to tell you. I anticipated reading about a strong warrior, a harsh boss, or a man who just asked for authority and submission. History loves to show you things occasionally, you know. What I discovered, however, was the tale of a guy who wept when the underprivileged went hungry. He patched his own sandals, swept his own home, and fixed his own clothes. A man who buried his own children while maintaining a kind grin. You can't fake that, man. I sat there saying, wait a minute. The most followed man on the planet is this one. He is adored by billions. And that's how he lived. No palace, no throne, no guards, just heart and humility. The odd thing is that as I read more, it seemed more and more like I was reading about someone who had been directing me all my life without my knowledge. His upbringing was the first thing that shocked me. His father died before he was born, and he was born in Mecca. When he was only 6 years old, his mother. Accordingly, he entered this world already shattered, tested, and having endured suffering that most people would have used as a reason to give up. Not him, though. They believe he was reared by his uncle. He was also known as Alamine, the trustworthy, from an early age. You must now comprehend something. When all of the people in your city, rich, poor, friends, and strangers, call you reliable, character is that. You see, I've worked in television long enough to know that while people can temporarily fabricate an image, they are unable to do the same with a reputation. What truly struck me was the name Alamine, which immediately made it clear to me that this man wasn't born in a palace. He was shaped by adversity, integrity, and religion. I then read about the arrival of revelation. Imagine this now. You are 40 years old. No one has been wronged by you. You lead a simple life. You're attempting to make sense of this strange world while meditating in a cave when all of a sudden, Gabriel, the angel, appears to you and says, read. He says, I can't read, 3 times. When I read that part, I thought, that's me right there. I don't have no theology degree. I'm not a scholar. I'm just a man trying to figure it out. But God still talks to folks like that, folks who don't feel qualified. I stopped there because it wasn't about literacy. Rather, it was about reading the signs and opening your eyes to truth even when you think you don't have what it takes. After that, I read about how he went right to his wife, Katager, after being rattled and terrified by the mountain, and she didn't condemn him, call him insane, or flee. By God, she murmured, wrapping him up, he would never disgrace you. Do you know what that is? Love is that. That is true collaboration. When she witnessed her lover losing it, the woman remarked, I believe you. Then I thought, boy, we don't talk about that enough. Perhaps more people would view the prophet differently if they realized that his story began with love rather than power. He didn't use an army to launch an empire. He began it with faith, truth, and revelation. It wasn't simple either. He was betrayed by his people. They made fun of him. Trash was thrown at him. He lost his buddies, his uncle, and his wife. He did not, however, curse them back once. In one of the stories I read, he visited a town named Taif. They chased him out and stoned him till his feet bled after he got there merely to deliver the message. According to the angel, we can destroy this place if you want. Do you remember what he said? He replied, no, maybe their children will believe. Do you realize how much mercy it takes to be hurt and still want the people who have wronged you well? That is divine. That isn't typical. This man, he ain't just teaching religion. I kept telling myself as I read more. He is teaching humanity. Because look, the environment we live in now, it promotes arrogance. It honors those who show the most and shout the loudest. However, this prophet and hero demonstrated to the world that true grandeur is silent. It's operational. The key is patience. It's based on faith. He was not a castle owner. He was not dressed in gold. He would grin, eat dates, and sit among the impoverished. To tell the truth, I was embarrassed when I discovered how ignorant I was of Islam and how easily I trusted what I was told by others rather than studying the religion from the man himself. I laid that book down and said, "Steve, you've been reading a lot of people's opinions about the prophet, but now you're finally meeting him." And he transformed me, Guy. Thus, I continued to read night after night. And I can assure you that as I gained more knowledge about Prophet Muhammad, I began to ask myself questions I was unaware I had. You see, you start to pick up a lot of noise when you spend enough time in this planet. Politics, fame, wealth, and pride may all become so overwhelming that you lose sight of reality. However, man, the prophet's life is tranquil. It's modest, like fresh air in a smoky atmosphere. It cuts through the cacophony. He used to walk with orphans, according to what I read. He would sit with the poorest of the poor and give them a sense of importance. The world needs a man like that right now, I thought. I've hosted shows, I've encountered individuals from all backgrounds. Let me tell you, I have witnessed humility, janitors, million-dollar outfits, and arrogance. However, I felt as though I had discovered the recipe for true success when I read about the prophet. Because this man chose simplicity when he might have had it all. Service was more important to him than luxury. When he had the option to destroy, he decided to forgive. When retaliation would have been simpler, he chose mercy. As I read, I wondered, Steve, how recently have you shown forgiveness to someone who didn't deserve it? When did you last grin at someone who made fun of you? I didn't like my response, Guy. We all talk about success, you see. Happiness is a topic we all discuss. However, this individual demonstrated that it's not about what you get. What you contribute is what matters, and not in a way that is meant to elicit praise. Giving from the heart when no one notices is what I mean. One tale in particular truly affected me. Every time the prophet passed her home one day, a woman would hurl trash at him. She would do that every day. Same location, same time. And she didn't one day. He halted as a result. "Where is she?" he inquired. They claimed she was ill. Are you aware of what he did? He went to see her, asked how she was doing, and said a prayer for her. I sit there thinking, who does that? That's not merely a good man. You can't tell me that. That's a higher level. He seemed to be teaching us that seeking retribution doesn't solve anything. You're not elevated by that rage. Mercy does. It also caused me to reflect on our modern way of life. Politics, disputes, hate, and social media. Everyone wants to give a clap back. Nobody want to forgive. Everybody want to be right. Nobody want to be righteous. But this man, he chose righteousness every time. And let me tell you what else moved me. The way he treated women. See, I ain't never read nothing like that from the 7th century. He said, "The best of you are those who are best to their women." He said, "Paradise lies under the feet of your mother." Man, when I read that, I said, wait a minute. This is 1,400 years ago. And this man talking about women like that. While kings were treating women like property, he was treating them like queens. He didn't just preach respect. He lived it. He helped his wives around the house. He listened to them. He sought their advice. And I thought that's not just love. That's leadership. Because a real man don't need to stand on somebody to feel tall. A real man lifts others up. And that hit me deep because I got daughters. I thought if every man on this planet treated women the way this man did, we'd have heaven on earth. Then I came across the story of how he lost his son Ibrahim, and it broke me because you expect a prophet to be unshakable. But he wept. He held his child in his arms and cried. And when someone asked him about it, he said, "The eyes shed tears. The heart grieves. But we say only what pleases our Lord." That right there, that's strength with surrender. That's faith that don't deny pain, but walks through it. And I realize we've been told for too long that faith means pretending you're okay. But the prophet showed that faith is crying and still trusting God through the tears. Now, here's the thing that shocked me most. For all the love he gave, for all the forgiveness, the patience, people still hated him. They still called him names, tried to kill him, drove him out of his home. And I thought, man, if the most patient man on earth got hated, what makes you think you won't? See, that's when I learned a new kind of peace. The peace that comes from realizing that people's opinions don't define you. Your purpose does. And the prophet's purpose was bigger than revenge, bigger than ego, bigger than pain. It was to remind us all that God's mercy outweighs his wrath. There's this one hadith, a saying of the prophet, that made me stop cold. He said, if you put your trust completely in Allah, he will provide for you as he provides for the birds. They go out hungry in the morning and come back full at night. Man, I stare at that for a long time because that's the kind of faith I've been missing. That's the kind of peace I've been searching for all these years. The kind that don't come from money or fame or applause. It comes from trust, real trust. And then I started seeing the pattern. The prophet wasn't teaching a new religion. He was teaching a way of life, a way to live with peace in your soul. No matter what's happening outside you, he smiled more than anyone, even though he suffered more than most. He gave more than anyone, even though he owned less than most. He forgave more than anyone, even though he was wronged more than most. And I thought, that's the kind of man I want to follow. Not because he demanded it, but because his example made me want to. And the more I read, the more I started asking myself, what would the world look like if more of us lived like that? If more of us prayed for our enemies instead of cursing them? If more of us smiled through struggle instead of complaining? If more of us saw service, not status, as success? I started realizing Islam wasn't spread by swords. It was spread by character, by honesty, by mercy, by truth. And when I read that his last words before he passed were, be mindful of your prayers and be kind to those under your care, I just sat there silent, because that's all he ever wanted for us to pray, to remember God, and to take care of each other. Man, I thought I would just learn history, but I was learn how to live. You know what's crazy? The more I read about Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the quieter my world got. All that noise in my head, the fame, the pressure, the next show, the next deal, it started to fade because I was looking at a man who had everything that mattered and nothing that most of us chase. He didn't have palaces. He didn't have private jets. He didn't have 1 million followers shouting his name. But he had peace. And that peace wasn't from comfort. It was from connection. Connection to God. See, I've spent my whole life trying to make it, trying to climb, trying to be somebody. But this man, he made it by bowing. He climbed by kneeling. He became somebody by serving everybody. And I thought, hold up, that's flipped upside down from how the world teaches us success. In this world, they say, talk loud, be proud, chase the bag. But this man whispered to the heart, gave away what he had, and said, the real rich man is the one content with what Allah gave him. And that hit me because I've been rich and still restless. I've been praised and still I had the applause, the cars, the lights, and still felt like something was missing. But when I read about him walking humbly, praying at night while the world slept, crying for people who mocked him, I said, that's a man who knew God for real. He didn't just believe, he lived it. He didn't pray just for blessing. He prayed for forgiveness. He didn't serve just to look good. He served because his heart couldn't do anything else. And I realized maybe closeness to God ain't about preaching. Maybe it ain't about how many verses you can quote or how many followers you got. Maybe it's about how you treat people when nobody's watching. That's what the prophet did. He prayed for the ones who hurt him. He fed the hungry before himself. He forgave the ones who wanted him dead. And I thought, man, that's divine strength. Because anybody can love when love's easy, but to love when it's hardest, that's heavenly. It reminded me of something else I read, how one of his companions once said, the prophet's face was always smiling, and his heart was always remembering God, always smiling, even when life was hard. And I said, Steve, when's the last time you smiled through pain? See, I've been through things. Times I didn't know how I was going to make it. Times when doors slammed in my face when I thought it was over. And I remember back then I used to ask God, why me? But now I look at the prophet's story and I think maybe it was never punishment. Maybe it was preparation. Because every test he faced, every loss he suffered, every betrayal, it built him into the man who could carry the message of God. And that made me think about my own pain. Maybe the stuff I went through wasn't there to break me. Maybe it was there to wake me. Maybe God's been calling me this whole time. I just wasn't listening. And then there was one story that sealed it for me. When the prophet came back to Mecca, the same city that had exiled him, mocked him, hunted him, and he stood before the people who once tried to kill him. And you know what he said? He said, "Go. You are free. No revenge, no pride, no payback, just mercy." And I remember closing that book, sitting back, and whispering to myself, that's what being close to God looks like. It ain't loud. It ain't showy. It's mercy in motion. And man, I realized something deep. If the prophet could forgive them, who am I to hold grudges? If he could stay humble in victory, who am I to be proud in comfort? If he could bow 5 times a day in gratitude, who am I to forget my Lord even once? And that's when it hit me. Islam ain't just a religion. It's a rhythm of bowing, thanking, forgiving, serving. A rhythm that connects your soul to its source. 5 times a day, every day, until peace becomes your default state. I sat there thinking this man lived over 400 years ago, and yet his light's still reaching people like me. A kid from Cleveland who thought he'd seen it all only to realize he hadn't seen nothing yet because I'd seen success. But now I was starting to see truth. You know, after all that I sat alone one night, no cameras, no audience, no laughter, just me. And I thought about everything I'd read about the Prophet Muhammad, everything that man stood for. And I said to myself, Steve, what you been chasing? Because see, when you get older, you start realizing all them trophies don't talk back to you. Them cars don't hold your hand when you're scared. Them checks don't pray for your soul when you're gone. But faith does. Faith fills that space that fame can't touch. And that's what I saw in Islam through the life of the Prophet. A faith that fills the empty. It ain't about money. It ain't about status. It's about peace. Ain't that what we all want? Peace. But the world got us thinking peace is something you buy or retire into. No, ma'am. Peace is something you return to. And that's what I felt when I read about how he used to sit with his companions. Simple, humble kind. How he laughed with children, respected women, honored his neighbors, even cared for animals. It hit me. The man who had the power to rule nations chose instead to serve arts. And I thought, if the prophet of God could be that humble, what excuse do I have? You know, I remember one time I was in Dubai. I was walking past this big mosque, and the call to prayer started, and I saw folks just stopping what they were doing. Phones down, shopping carts still, everybody just turning toward God. And I stood there, man. I ain't even Muslim, but I felt something like time itself had bowed. And I thought, this is what it means to remember God in a world that forgot him. It reminded me of that verse I came across. Verily, in the remembrance of Allah, do hearts find rest. And I'm telling you, I've been chasing rest my whole life. I tried money, fame, success, applause, but I never found rest till I found meaning. And meaning came from stories like his. You start asking yourself different questions. Not what do I want next, but what am I doing this for? Not how do I win, but how do I serve? And I'll tell you something else that changed me. How the prophet treated women. See, I grew up watching how this world can be cruel to women. And yet, here's this man 1,400 years ago saying, the best among you are those who are best to their wives. Now, that's a real man right there. Not by power, not by pride, but by how gently he carried those around him. And you know what? That made me think that maybe true strength ain't in what you can lift, but in what you can hold without hurting it. That's wisdom. That's divine masculinity. I've been trying to carry that into my own life. How I talk, how I lead, how I pray. And every time I feel myself drifting, when the noise gets too loud, I go back and read about that man who started with nothing but faith and changed the whole world. And I think if he could trust God through that, then I can trust him through this because look, life going to hit you. You're going to lose people. You're going to fall short. But the prophet taught that even when you fall toward mercy. And that's what I hold on to. So now whenever I see a Muslim praying, I don't see difference anymore. I see discipline. I see devotion. I see a mirror reminding me, hey, Steve, don't forget who made you. And I ain't saying I got it all figured out. I still got questions. I still got flaws. But I'll tell you this, learning about Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, didn't just teach me about Islam. It taught me about myself. It taught me that greatness ain't about standing tall. It's about bowing right. It taught me that legacy ain't what they say about you when you're gone. It's what God remembers about you when you meet him. And I realized that man Muhammad, he didn't just bring a religion. He brought a reminder that no matter where you're from, what you've done, or what you believe, there's still time to return to peace. And maybe that's why when I finished learning his story, I didn't feel confused. I didn't feel judged. I felt invited. Like God was saying, Steve, you see what peace looks like now. You ready to find yours? And man, I'm still walking that road. But I'll tell you what, ever since that day, I ain't been walking alone. If you ever wonder who the Prophet Muhammad was, don't just read the books. Look at the way his followers pray, forgive, and serve. 'Cause that light, it never went.